The day my ex-mother-in-law walked into that courtroom, she had 17 lawyers and 30 years of family money behind her. I had a folder. She didn't know about the folder. What she also didn't know, what nobody knew until after the trial, was that the woman who told me to start that folder had been dead for 3 years. And she had predicted everything. Before we begin, please like and subscribe. Now get comfortable, because this one will stay with you. Emily Carter was 33 years old and lived in Franklin, Tennessee, a small city south of Nashville, where the streets were lined with old oak trees, and everyone knew everyone's business except, apparently, their own. She worked as a licensed occupational therapist at Vanderbilt Children's Outpatient Clinic. She specialized in pediatric motor development children who couldn't hold pencils, couldn't button shirts, couldn't navigate the ordinary physical demands of being small in a large world. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, she saw a 7-year-old named Marcus who had cerebral palsy and a laugh that could reorganize a room. She had been working with him for 2 years. In that time, he had learned to pour his own cereal, zip his own jacket, and write his own name in letters that got straighter every week. Outside of work, Emily cooked. Not elaborate meals, she didn't have time for elaborate, but precise ones. A 15-minute lemon pasta that tasted like it had taken an hour. A chicken soup from scratch that she made every Sunday in a pot her mother had given her. She had been married for 6 years. She had 2 daughters, Emma, 4, and Lily, 2. She had believed until she was 31 that she understood the shape of her life. She was wrong. Her husband's name was Daniel Whitmore. He was 36, tall, with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He worked at his family's commercial real estate firm, Whitmore Property Group. His mother was Patricia Whitmore. This is where the story actually begins. Patricia was 61 years old and had spent 4 decades perfecting the specific art of control that doesn't look like control. She was unfailingly polite. She remembered birthdays. She brought flowers. She asked about your work with what appeared to be genuine interest, and then used everything you told her to calibrate exactly how much leverage she had. She had never liked Emily. She had never said so directly. That was the point. The first time Emily understood what she was dealing with, she had been married for 4 months. Thanksgiving, the Whitmore house, a 7-bedroom colonial in Brentwood, was full of. Emily had offered to bring a dish. Patricia had said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We have everything handled. Just bring yourself." Emily brought herself. At the table, Patricia announced that she had made everything from scratch. Then she turned to Emily with a smile that had no warmth in it anywhere. "Emily, I heard you like to cook. You'll have to make something for us sometime." The table smiled. Emily smiled. She drove home that night understanding, with the clarity of someone who processes physical signals for a living, that the sentence had not been an invitation. It had been a reminder. This is my kitchen. This is my table. This is my family. You are a guest. The second scene happened 14 months later, after Emma was born. Emily had taken 3 months of maternity leave. When she went back to work, she arranged childcare through a licensed provider. Patricia called Daniel the same day. "Mom thinks it would be better if she watched Emma. She's available, and it's family." Emily finished her session. She drove to pick up Emma. She did not respond to the text until she was home, Emma fed and asleep. Then she called Daniel and said, calmly, "I already have child." Daniel said, "Mom just wants to help." Emily said, "I know." She did not change the childcare arrangement. The following Sunday, at family dinner, Patricia said to the table, in the tone of someone making a casual observation, "It's interesting, isn't it, how some women feel more comfortable leaving their children with strangers than with family?" Nobody responded. Daniel poured himself. Emily cut her food into smaller pieces and said nothing. That was the central wound. Not the words, the silence that followed them. The way the table continued. The way Daniel poured his wine. The way Emily's presence or absence of response made no difference to the room's functioning. Daniel's sister-in-law was named Diane Whitmore. She was married to Daniel's older brother, Carter, a quieter, less certain version of Daniel, who seemed to exist primarily in his mother's peripheral vision. Diane was 38, originally from Knoxville, a former elementary school teacher who had stopped working when their son was born and had not gone back. Emily and Diane had been friendly in the cautious way of two women who share a family, but not a history. They had never had a real conversation. Emily had always assumed, because Patricia had made sure she assumed that Diane was Patricia's ally, that the warmth Diane occasionally showed her was performance. That behind closed doors, Diane reported back. She had been wrong about that. She would not know it for 3 more years. Diane's mother was named Ruth Pearson. Ruth had grown up in rural Tennessee, the daughter of she had married young, deferred constantly, apologized for things that were not her fault. She had tried to raise Diane differently. When Diane married into the Whitmores, Ruth had come to Thanksgiving once, sat at Patricia's table, watched the room for 3 hours, and driven home without saying much. That night she called Diane and said, "Keep your eyes open in that house." Diane had said, "Mom, it's fine." Ruth had said, "I didn't say it wasn't fine. I said keep your eyes open." 11:30 Ruth was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when Diane's son was 2 years old. She lived for 14 months after the diagnosis, long enough to see the Whitmore family clearly, long enough to watch what happened to Emily at those Sunday dinners. 3 weeks before she died, Ruth called Diane to her hospital room alone. She held her daughter's hand. "Ruth, Diane, one day Patricia is going to try to erase someone from that family. Maybe you. Maybe another woman. Maybe someone who hasn't even arrived yet. When that happens, I want proof she existed." "Diane, Mom, what are you talking about?" "Ruth, start writing everything down. Dates, times, what is said, what is done. Someday you'll understand why." "Diane, promise me you'll do this." Diane promised. Ruth died 11 days later. Diane bought a composition notebook the following week. She dated the first page. She had been writing ever since. The divorce was Daniel's idea. Or rather, it was Patricia's idea, delivered through Daniel. Daniel came home on a Wednesday in March and sat at the kitchen table and said he wanted to separate. Emily was making her lemon pasta. She sat across from him. She asked 3 questions about the girls, about the house, about timing. He answered them with the prepared specificity of a man who had rehearsed this conversation with a lawyer. Patricia's lawyer, who had been working on the separation agreement for 2 months before Daniel said a word. Emily said, "All right." She went back to the stove. She finished making the pasta. She ate alone after Daniel left to stay at his parents' house. After Daniel left, Emily walked down the hallway to the girls' room. Emma's bed. Lily's crib. She picked up Emma's stuffed rabbit, the one Emma couldn't sleep without. She sat down on the floor. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. Holding a stuffed rabbit in a room that suddenly felt too quiet. Audience note, this is where the viewer stops admiring Emily and starts feeling with her. What she was dealing with was this. The Whitmore family lawyer had prepared a separation agreement that classified the house which Emily had contributed $34,000 toward as a down payment as a Whitmore family. The custody arrangement proposed that the girls live primarily with Daniel, citing Emily's work schedule and the stability of the Whitmore family support structure. Emily read the agreement at her kitchen table at 11 p.m. with a yellow highlighter. She highlighted 12 passages. She called a lawyer in the morning. Her lawyer's name was Carol Voss, a 50-year-old family law attorney in Nashville, with short gray hair and the specific energy of someone who had heard every version of every story. Carol read the separation agreement. "Do you have documentation of anything?" Carol said. "Anything at all." "Communications, incidents, dates," Emily said. "I have some texts, some emails." Carol nodded. "Get everything you have and start writing down everything you remember." Emily went home and started writing. She had been writing for 3 weeks when her phone rang. It was Diane. They met at a coffee shop in Franklin on a Tuesday morning. Diane arrived first. She was sitting in the corner booth with a large coffee and a composition notebook on the table in front of her. Emily sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Diane said, "I've been keeping notes." Emily looked at the notebook. "Since when?" 3 years ago. Diane paused. "My mother asked me to." Emily looked at the notebook for a long time. "Why are you giving this to me?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "Because my mother watched what happened to you at those dinners," she said. "She saw it from the first Thanksgiving she came to. She saw how that table, who got heard and who didn't." Another pause. "She told me to watch. She said it would matter someday." Diane pushed the notebook across the table. "Everything," she said. Emily read the notebook that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the composition book and a cup of tea that went cold. And then she started seeing things that made her hands shake. Patricia only attacks directly when she believes she can win. When she loses control, watch. She'll use Daniel as her weapon. She'll make him believe leaving is his idea. It won't be, but she'll make it feel that way. Emily stared at the date on that entry. 2 years ago. 2 years before Daniel said he wanted to separate. If Emily ever becomes too independent, too successful in her own right, Patricia will try to make her look unstable. She'll plant seeds. A concern there. By the time it reaches court, Emily won't recognize her own reputation. Emily looked at the custody filing Patricia's lawyer had submitted. Concerns about the mother's emotional stability. Word for word. Predicted 2 years in advance. The girls. Patricia will offer to raise them herself. She'll call it family stability. She'll frame Emily's work schedule as neglect. It's about control. Emily closed the notebook. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid. Because she finally understood what Ruth Pearson had seen from across a dinner table that one Thanksgiving. A predator. A blueprint. And a daughter who was smart enough to write it all down. The notebook had 47 entries spanning 3 years. Not just incidents. Predictions. Ruth hadn't just told Diane to watch. Ruth had understood the entire architecture of the Whitmore family. And she had left Diane a map. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in September. Patricia arrived with the family lawyer and a secondary attorney she had retained specifically for the custody. She wore a navy blazer and the expression of a woman who had already decided how the day would end. Daniel sat beside his lawyer, looking uncomfortable, in a way that suggested he was only now beginning to understand the specific machinery his mother had set in motion. New scene. Before Diane overhears Patricia. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Diane's son ran ahead. Diane followed. She rounded a corner and stopped. Patricia was standing near the water fountain, speaking quietly to her attorney. "Patricia, I spent 30 years building this family. I'm not going to let an outsider destroy it." Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was tired. Almost sad. Diane ducked back around the corner. She still hated Patricia. But now, she understood her. Audience note. This makes Patricia a sophisticated villain, not a cartoon. Carol Voss sat beside Emily. On the table in front of Carol was a folder. It was not a thin folder. The Whitmore attorney went first. He presented the custody proposal primary residence with Daniel, citing work schedules, family stability. He used the word stability 7 times in 11. He presented a document signed by Patricia offering to provide full-time childcare. He sat down with the confidence of a man who had just finished a presentation he had given many times. Carol stood up. She opened the folder. She presented the notebook entries systematically. Not emotionally. Clinically, the prediction about Daniel being used as a weapon dated 2 years before the divorce. Diane's name. The time, the place. The prediction about Emily being labeled unstable dated 18 months before the custody filing. Witness, Carter Whitmore, who had been in the room when Patricia made the comment. The prediction about the family stability argument dated before Emma's first birthday. 47 entries. But Carol didn't read all of them. She read the ones that mattered, the ones that proved Patricia Whitmore had been planning this long before anyone else knew there was a plan. When Carol finished, the room was quiet in the specific way of rooms where the air pressure has changed. Patricia's secondary attorney leaned over and said something in her ear. Patricia's expression did not change. But her hands, folded on the table, went very still. The judge looked at the folder for a long time. Then she looked at Patricia. Then she looked at Daniel. She said, "I have very serious concerns about this family's ability to provide a healthy environment for these children given the evidence presented today." Daniel's lawyer started to respond. The judge held up one hand. The room went quiet again. Primary physical custody to the mother, the judge. Standard visitation to the father. The court will appoint a guardian ad litem to monitor the paternal grandmother's involvement. This court is not closed to revisiting the financial aspects of the property division, given the documentation of the mother's down payment contribution. She looked directly at Patricia. This court is, however, closed to further arguments about the mother's fitness. The record is clear. Outside the courthouse, Emily stood on the steps in the September afternoon. Carol stood beside her. "Primary custody," Carol said. "I've been doing this for 22 years. I've never had documentation like that walk through my door." Emily looked out at the parking lot. Her mother told her to write it down, she said. "Smart woman," Carol said. "Yes," Emily said. "She was." She called Diane from the parking lot. Diane picked up on the second ring. Emily said primary custody. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Diane said, very quietly, "Mom would have liked that." Emily said, "I know." Another silence. "Diane," Emily said, "why did you stay? In that family, after your mother died, after everything you wrote in that notebook." Diane was quiet for a long time. "Carter isn't his mother," she said finally, "and my son loves his father." A pause. "And I think someone needed to be in that house keeping their eyes open." Emily said nothing. "Mom told me once," Diane continued, "that the most powerful thing a woman can do in a situation she can't change is pay attention. Because someday the situation changes. And then the attention becomes something else." Emily looked at the courthouse steps behind her. She was right. She usually was, Diane said. The case was closed. The custody arrangement was working. The house was hers, officially, after a separate hearing that Carol had handled without drama. On a Friday evening in February, Emily was in her kitchen. Emma was doing spelling homework at the island. Lily was drawing something that may have been a horse or possibly a house. Emily was making the chicken soup. The index card inside the cabinet door. She stirred the pot. She thought about Ruth Pearson, who had sat in a hospital bed in the last weeks of her life, and decided that the most useful thing she could do was give her daughter 3 words and a direction. Write it down. After dinner, after the girls were asleep, Emily went to her desk. She pulled out Ruth's notebook. She hadn't looked at it since she wasn't sure why she was taking it out now. She flipped through the pages, the predictions, the entries. The handwriting of a woman she had met once at a Thanksgiving dinner who had looked across a table and understood everything. She reached the last page. Something was taped to the inside of the back cover. A small envelope. She hadn't noticed it before. Her hands started shaking before she opened it. On the front of the envelope, in Ruth's handwriting for Emily. "Only if Patricia finally goes too far." Emily opened the envelope. She unfolded a single sheet of paper, dated 3 weeks before Ruth died. The letter read, "Emily, if you're reading this, then Patricia finally did exactly what I knew she would do." Emily's breath caught. The notebook wasn't for court. It wasn't for Daniel. It wasn't even for you. Emily stared at the words. It was for your daughters. So one day when they're old enough to understand, they would know that their mother was never the problem. That the family they grew up watching, the silences at dinner, the way their grandmother looked at you, the way their father never defended you, none of that was your fault. "I'm sorry I won't be there to see you win. But I already know you will, because I watched you at that Thanksgiving dinner. You smiled when you should have screamed. You stayed when you should have left. You showed up for a family that didn't deserve you. And you did it for them. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. Tell my daughter I'm proud of her. Tell your daughters their mother is a warrior. And keep cooking. Ruth, Emily sat at her desk for a very long time. The letter in her hands, the notebook on the desk, the chicken soup cooling on the stove. She thought about a woman she had met once, a woman who had looked at her from across a crowded room and seen everything. Who had gone home and told her daughter to start writing. Who had died not knowing how the story ended. But who had believed in her anyway. Emily folded the letter carefully. She put it back in the envelope. She placed the envelope inside the notebook, and she closed the cover. The next morning, Emma came into the kitchen while Emily was making breakfast. "Mom," Emma said, "why don't we see Grandma Patricia anymore?" Emily looked at her daughter. Then, she thought about Ruth's letter, so one day they would know that their mother was never the problem. She knelt down so she was eye level with Emma. "Because some people," Emily said carefully, "aren't safe to be around. And the most important thing a mother can do is protect her daughters from people who aren't safe." Emma thought about that for a moment. Does Grandma Patricia miss us? Emily paused. "I don't know, sweetheart, but that's not your job to figure out. That's the grown-up's job. Your job is to eat your pancakes and learn how to spell necessary." Emma giggled. "Does necessary have one S or two?" "Two," Emily said. Emma wrote it down. Emily stood at the stove, stirring the oatmeal. She thought about Ruth Pearson, the woman who had never raised her voice in a courtroom, who had never needed to, who had just taught her daughter to pay attention, and left a letter, and saved a family that wasn't even hers. She thought about Diane, who had kept her eyes open for 3 years, who had stayed in that house so someone would be watching. She thought about her daughters, who would never know the full story until they were old enough to understand. And then she thought about the letter again. Keep cooking. She smiled. She added a pinch of cinnamon to the oatmeal. On-screen text, Ruth Pearson never saw the courtroom. She never met Emily's daughters. She never knew if the notebook would work. But she believed it would. And that was enough. That was always enough. If this story stayed with you, especially if you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family, take a moment to tell us in the comments. And if there's a Ruth in your life, someone who saw you when you thought nobody was watching, share this video with them. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Bonds in Betrayal, and hit the notification bell. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.